Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of LinkedIn for Leaders. I'm your host, Karan Malhotra, and I'm very fortunate to welcome Lisa Baird. Hi, Lisa. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Con. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Good to have you here today. And we can see a couple of more people joining us. I'm going to just let them in. Um, yes, so today's show is about the craft of writing. And it's fantastic. Hey, Alexia, nice to have you. We've just got started. Like I said, today, because we're doing it on Zoom, if you want to join us on stage, feel free. We want to keep this interactive. And so, with that, let me jump in with a introduction to Lisa first. So, Lisa is a multidisciplinary designer, writer, and strategist based in Paris. Lisa started her career in large scale commercial print in Dallas, then moved on to investment banking in New York, before eventually moving into strategic finance and corporate strategy for public universities in Texas and California. After a stint as a grant maker at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle, she returned to the San Francisco Bay Area as a principal designer for the design and innovation consultancy IDEO, where she specialized in systems design and interactive data visualization, primarily in the education and media technology studios. Between 2015 and 2022, she built a healthy design and strategy consulting practice with clients like IDEO, Frog, Collins, and others. In 22, she moved her business from California to France to launch Fraîche Design Thinking, where she serves as president and creative director. With that, welcome again, Lisa.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So, yeah, with that, I'm going to we schedule for like 30 minutes or so, but they tend to go by very quickly. And Lisa and I actually know each other from another community, Neol, where we both creative leaders in that ecosystem. Been so fortunate to meet so many amazing people from that ecosystem, and we've been in touch. And I've admired. It's like I said, I think, Lisa writes prose like poetry. And you feel so drawn into her writing, and which is why it'll be fantastic that we're having this conversation. So with that, Lisa, you write in so many different places, right? You have your LinkedIn, you write on Substack. I'm pretty sure there's a book in the works somewhere. I would be very disappointed if there wasn't. Um, but on your Substack bio, you call yourself a design strategy clairvoyant. What does that mean?
Um, that's just gosh, how do I put this? Using the word clairvoyant was a way to signal that I don't take myself too seriously. So, so much of strategy is just having an opinion or a point of view
Hmm.
about where the world is heading and what the near and maybe medium term future might look like, and sometimes even speculative design fiction far term future. So you're really just a fortune teller of sorts. So I was just using the word to kind of bring down the stakes a little bit and signal that I don't take myself too seriously. But yeah, it's about looking into the future and thinking about what worlds might look like beyond our current horizon.
That's amazing. Do you think most designers sort of fit or strategists could fall into that same category, the way you're describing
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the whole entire discipline of design, at least lowercase d design that I practice, as compared to capital D design, like the classical disciplines like graphic design and industrial design. But even more and more, some of the classical disciplines are embracing the world of design that I came up through, which is more human-centered design and yes, design thinking and design as a method for innovation, design as a method for strategy. And I think anybody who practices design in that broader sense about where the world is headed and where people are headed uh, is some kind of clairvoyant, is some kind of fortune
Mm.
teller. But it's
Mhm.
rooted in something. It's rooted in signals and signs, and that's kind of why the analogy is apt for me.
Mm.
Um, it's rooted in signals and signs from not, in this case, the stars per se, but in stories from people and qualitative research and getting inside the emotional and functional needs that other humans have. And so in that sense, we're all kind of like Whoopi Goldberg from the movie Ghost, where she's allowing that Patrick Swayze ghost to like pass through her body so that Demi Moore could receive the messages. I think we play that Whoopi Goldberg role in a lot of ways.
That's amazing. It's been a minute since I've watched that movie, but it was an amazing movie for sure. We were chatting about this just before we went live, and I want to encourage everyone. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and we'll look to keep this interactive and involve you in the conversation as well. But like I was saying, I was telling Lisa before we went live that when I read some of her writing, I feel like almost immediately immersed in the way she writes because she uses metaphors and similes and analogies so well, and she crafts them so nicely together. So, from that perspective, you're painting a picture, right, Lisa? So, how do you achieve that as a writer, and how do you elicit a response like maybe to some extent that I've described just now?
I spend a lot of time trying to convince myself of certain things. Um, Writing is a way for me to test the idea, um, test it to make sure it makes sense to me. And so I'm oftentimes looking for parallels that exist in the world, parallels that exist in nature or human nature or behaviors or my local community or broader global communities. I'm just looking for things that seem like they're following a similar pattern.
Mm,
Because if they are, then I feel more confident in the idea. And so I will use metaphors all the time to just convince myself that this thing, whatever it is I'm grappling with, has legs of some kind. And so that's where the metaphors are often coming from. I'm just trying to say, hey, to myself, hey, this exists in a similar way in a different part of the world and our existence. And so there's some pattern for this.
mm,
So it's not too far-fetched that this could be true. So it's really just a self-convincing mechanism. And when
mm,
I try to like when I'm reading others writing, I prefer to let my brain fill in the gaps. You know that there's that research that if you write a sentence, any sentence, and change the spelling, basically intentionally misspell every single word in the sentence by moving the letters around within the word. But as
mhm.
long as the first letter and the last letter are the same, our
Read through it.
brains will fill in the gap and we'll still be able to read like long passages where not a single word is a real existing word. They're just
Mhm.
jumbles of letters, but the first and last letter are always in the right place. Um, we just have this ability to fill in like that. And so I prefer reading where those dots are given, but my imagination can fill in the rest instead of being spoon-fed each detail. So I just tend to jump right in, and metaphor is a great way to do that because I'm not, as opposed to analogy, direct analogy, but metaphor is even better for me because I'm not exactly telling you the way in which these things are parallel. I'm
Mhm.
allowing you to maybe come to that conclusion on your own because when you do that, you're invested in the idea too. So it's a persuasive technique, I think. And again, it all starts with me trying to persuade myself.
And that's amazing. And the thing that you mentioned, right? The fact that you have the first and the last alphabet the same, and those essentially work then in some ways as anchor points that you sort of know, and then your brain fills in the rest. And I'm wondering because you're talking about metaphors and patterns that you're seeing that also in some ways comes from you having maybe a wide set of anchor points in your own head that comes from curiosity around the world and people and reading, etc. So from that perspective, what are some of those anchor points that you keep going back to, whether it be it authors or spaces or people that yeah, let me stop there. What are some of those anchor points for you personally?
Yeah. I mean, I think the strongest ones that stand the test of time are just the way that people feel. and just the way that I've felt at different points in life. Like we've all felt worried, or we've all felt elated, we've all felt embarrassed,
Mm,
um, we've all felt hopeful. There's just these feelings. Everybody knows what they feel like. Hopefully, we've all felt in love.
mm,
And so if you reference them without saying too much, then the reader on the other side of that phrase or sentence feels recognized.
mm,
And that can feel really powerful to feel all of a sudden that you've been spotted and that you've been seen because of this allusion to a common feeling. And sometimes you didn't realize how common that feeling was.
mm,
And that again, that's why fiction is great. Fiction and poetry are wonderful because they deliver those same sorts of feelings to you, those same sorts of moments of recognition. And sometimes it can feel so powerful that you feel a little bit afraid. I mean, there was a recent book that I read. Oh my God, I actually have it on my shelf here. I have to give the name of this book to people. Perfection by an
oh,
Italian
wow.
writer, Vincenzo Latronico.
Okay.
Oh my God, this is a great, and I know Anna read it too because I told her to read it. It takes place in Berlin where Anna lives. But this is a great example of some recent fiction that I read where, without saying too many words, I just felt so incredibly recognized, not in a comfortable way. But
Okay.
it's such a good book, it's like it's barely 100 pages. You can do that with few words again, because the brain fills in the rest because we know our our internal worlds know what's being referenced, what's being alluded to.
And when you're writing, do you think of a specific person that you're writing for?
Me, again, like it sounds so silly, but I think it goes back to when I was in grade school. I was in mock trial, like the debate club. And that for some reason that must have hit me at the right moment in my life or something. But having to defend ideas came early for me because of this experience when I was young. So I'm always writing in a way that allows me to have justifications and defendable retorts at the ready. They're not always used, and I tend to not bring them out unless they're called for, because again, you might not need them. There might be such recognition among such a broad swath of people that see the same thing when it's pointed out that you don't really need just additional justifications or defense. And so, yeah, I guess I'm writing for an imaginary critique, an imaginary moment of debate, or design criticism where someone else is trying to pick apart the idea, and I've got a bank of additional patterns, metaphors, defenses that strengthen the idea.
Amazing. When we were chatting, leading up to this, you'd mentioned that you use something called the shape of story as a framework in your writing. Can you talk about that, please?
Yes. In my Master of Design at California College of the Arts years ago, I had a professor named Christina Wodke. She's an author. She wrote several books. One of the more recent ones is called Radical Focus. She also has a blog called Elegant Hack. So if you check out eleganthack.com, you'll find a bunch of her different musings and whatnot. But one of the posts she used as the basis of curriculum when she was teaching the art of storytelling to me and my colleagues, my classmates, when we were in this Master of Design program. And I just will never forget it. I mean, I credit her still to this day. Like I'm always tagging her, like, "Hey, thanks, Christina." I haven't seen her since the days that I was her student, but um, I will forever be grateful for her for teaching me the classic shape of story. And her thesis that she conveyed to us in the classroom was that nearly all stories follow the same basic shape, that there's a character, and this character, this main protagonist, has a goal. And the reason that you have to introduce the character and give them a goal is because they have some kind of motivation. When somebody has a goal, that means they're motivated towards something. And that motivation is recognized by the audience. So you immediately have an investment between the audience and that main character because the character is motivated. Of course, the character is in some kind of setting. They're in a city, they're at war, whatever the setting is of the story. And in that milieu, the character is kind of living life and has this kind of vague goal or motivation. And then suddenly, some kind of inciting incident, like some kind of door opens up a little bit and offers the character an opportunity to pass through that doorway. They don't have to take the opportunity, but if we're talking about a book or a movie or any other kind of interesting story, of course they take the opportunity, right? They pass through the doorway, that inciting incident. And what ensues from that point forward is, again, common across nearly any story structure. It's a series of struggles. It's a
Mm.
series of challenges, problems, conflicts, danger, risks, um, you know, moment after moment where it seems like this character is going to lose it all. Like they should never have passed through the door, right? Regret, I shouldn't have ever done this. And it's just building and it's building and it's getting more difficult. And you can kind of remember that original goal they had and that motivation they had slipping away. You can kind of see it slipping away as the struggles get more intense. And then finally, there's a crisis moment. There's something where it's just like this challenge cannot be overcome. There's a
Mm.
blackout moment. And we, as the audience and the character too, believe this is it. All is lost. It's over now. Um, but then that's the moment of change. That's the moment, we would think of it in classic story structure as just the climax, right? Something happens where the character is saved from this moment where all appears to be lost. Either they dig deep and they find some kind of stockpile of self-agency they didn't realize they had, or some other kind of rescue happens, self-rescue or exogenous rescue. So they're out of the mess suddenly. And from that point forward, the rest of the story is just a giant sigh of relief. There's resolution, there's denouement, there's tying up all the different loose ends that might have happened throughout the story to assuage the audience's curiosity. And once all those open ends are knitted together, the main character of this story kind of returns home, so to speak, wherever that starting point was, returns home. But they return home in a really special way. They return home changed because that entire series of struggles after the inciting incident was, in a way, that phrase forged through the fire. They were they were forged through that fire. And so now they look different. Their internal makeup is different, just the way iron ore would be different after it's forged in a fire. So now you have a main character who is markedly different in some special way. And that feels really satisfying, almost like
Mm.
music that ends on the
Mm.
right note. So yeah, I use that structure kind of over and over again because we're all we're all the main character of our own lives. We're all the experts of our own narrative story. We all live lives that are interesting, no matter what you may think of your own life. It's interesting because it's real and it exists, and you live in a setting and you have little doorways that creak open in front of you multiple times in life, multiple times in a day, maybe. And if you choose to pass through those thresholds, you're probably going to face a series of struggles. And that same arc can be painted over and over again with each of those opportunities. And so in business, it's the same, right? Like you can
Mm.
paint the team or the executive as the main protag. Or you can paint the business itself, like, oh, there's this little startup, and this little startup just wanted to change the world. And there were all these dragons that this little startup had to slay. And here's one, and here's the other, and here's the other. And then here's what happened at the end when they thought all was lost. And you can kind of do that over and over again. Lately, I've been applying this structure in my mind to planet Earth, you know. Look what she's going through.
Mhm. Mhm.
Struggles. Look at the dragons she is trying to slay, and the dragons in many ways are us. And we don't yet know what the crisis or blackout moment will be. We haven't quite gotten there, but we're approaching it. So there's definitely a story arc hiding in there as well.
That's amazing. And when you were talking about that, like I was drawing a parallel of typical professional journey that someone has, right? They start off, they finish college, and then they've gone to workplace for the first time. They've had a set of experiences, 5 years passed, they know a little bit more, they think to do, there's still a lot more to learn. Before you know it, another say the 10 years have passed, and now they know a lot more, they're ambitious, but they're reaching to this mid-career moment, and they want to get to what might be, let's say, a VP or XYZ kind of role if they're in that sort of domain. But then there are so many challenges. And now if we just sort of plant that brief bit in today, where there is just, we know that, for example, everything marketing and communication is increasingly programmatic. AI has just sort of supercharged that in so many ways. Now if you bring that back to sort of platforms like LinkedIn or even Substack and other places, so much of the content that's being created, or communication that people are putting out there, a reasonable amount of it is AI generated, right? So therefore, the opportunity is to, like you said, share the shape of your story out there. But then in my communication, a lot of the leaders that I sort of work with, invariably the first, there's this trepidation of how do I start and how
Yeah.
will I sound? So what would you say to someone like that, who is someone who has 15, 20 years experience, wants to start this narrative, they see it as an opportunity, but they don't know what might be the first couple of steps, what would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, one thing that's true about successful story arcs is that the main character is often reluctantly the hero, never viewed themselves as a hero. You can think of the Superman classical Clark Kent. He's nerdy, he has glasses. He never thought of himself as being the hero of the world in any way. And that's really appealing, this underdog idea. And so I'd say that one reason that this method is difficult to apply to leadership is because a lot of leaders have been wrongly informed throughout their career that vulnerability is not an asset and that
Mhm.
authenticity and truth is something to be eschewed and downplayed because it won't help teams or it won't help bottom lines. And I'd say that that's really false. And I think it's false in a couple of ways. One, it isn't human to be vulnerable or to have no authentic side, where there are concerns, weaknesses, goals, even the idea of unmet goals is viewed as a vulnerability in the eyes of a lot of leaders who have been wrongly informed. So I think it's just not human. So that's one reason why it's wrong. And another reason why it's wrong, in my opinion, is that classical economic theory teaches us that scarcity creates value. So the more scarce and rare something is, the more valuable it is. So if there's a lot of winner stories out there, first of all, those are so boring, where it's nothing but wins constantly. There was never any struggle. But also it's just flooded the scene. And it's continuing to flood the scene because AI, for better or worse, generative AI is based on what was available for training, and the training data is filled with all the winner stories, and so it
Mhm.
continues to produce more winner stories, and it furthers this economic concept that the more rare, scarce thing that has some flaws, that has some weaknesses visible, that's far more interesting just because it's rare and it stands out. So I'd say that casting yourself as a character with a goal that has a motivation towards something is going through struggles. It is not necessarily certain that you're going to win, or at least win in the way that you'd like to win.
Mhm.
Um, and letting some of the ambiguity hang out in the air, not just for the audience, but for yourself, like embracing the unknown and letting the story play out, I think can be a really useful way for anybody to tell their own story
Story.
and yeah, to get comfortable with what might happen.
And from that lens, like for example, in the tech world, there's been this idea of build in public, and sort of where you're taking people along the journey. You feel that now that kind of thing very strongly can be applied to individual stories, especially at this moment.
I mean, it depends on your cap table. It depends on yeah, it depends on who your equity holders are. I think you
Sure.
can build in public to a certain extent, but the way our capitalist consumerist society works is frankly one that doesn't reward full transparency
Mm.
and honesty. So build in public may work, but I think it really depends on the situation, which is why I encourage all startup founders I know to try to get to revenue as fast as they can and avoid VC money as long as they can so that they can be true to themselves and tell their own story, should they wish to, right? Just keep optionality. But there's definitely a point at which the truth is not helpful in a fiduciary sense, which is one of the reasons why I have personal struggles with the capitalist system that we live in. Because we live in a system that doesn't reward truth. How weird is that?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because it's so much easier to shine something, get someone to see it quickly, and then just sort of move on, as opposed to the work that goes into creating something long lasting and then talking about that. Um,
Yeah. Or just even just saying that experiments have failed and, fail fast to learn should be valued, but it isn't necessarily valued in a quarterly analyst call.
And with that, I'm also just conscious of time because like I said, these 30 minutes go by quickly. I think we have about 8 minutes to go. I want to ask a couple of quick questions, just circling back to the writing and some of the approach that you take. Where do your ideas come from? And I think we covered that to some extent, but do you in your ideas to writing process, how does that translate?
I I tend to write about things or pursue things that felt like an aha moment for me. So if I'm on a design project and there was qualitative research and I am synthesizing the transcripts from one-on-one interviews, for instance, as soon as I realize something that was kind of, listening between the lines of what this interview subject was saying, and I have that aha moment, I'm like, oh God, that's how they view it. That's how they feel. They didn't say it in so many words, but clearly that's the subtext here. And that will inspire me to try to work it out through words, to try to, build the idea. Again, look for patterns elsewhere in the world, analogous patterns to double check myself and write something out about that. So it's a process of pursuing aha moments. That's where
Okay.
ideas.
And
Yeah.
and what about feedback? Do you have like a feedback mechanism if you've been working on something for a while, or even something that you had as this aha moment, you're sure, you're not sure? Do you have like sounding boards?
I I guess, I mean, in a sense, if you're posting anything on digital platform these days, Substack or LinkedIn or whatever, there's built-in feedback mechanisms. But in terms of like formal writing, I mean, I've had to write like a book length project before, and I had a wonderful developmental editor who gave amazing, like true developmental feedback, meaning she wasn't just fixing punctuation and spelling and grammar. She was helping me strengthen ideas. That's really nice when you get the opportunity to work deeply with an editor like that. But yeah, no, I don't necessarily, I'm not writing projects that are, you think I'm writing a novel secretly. I'm not. I don't write projects that go through that kind
Hoping,
of
but
feedback. No.
amazing. What are some common mistakes that people make while writing?
Ah, I mean, the micro level, leaving out the Oxford comma is a mistake. I implore
Okay.
all of you to use the Oxford comma. It is a generous gesture towards your reader. And when you omit it, you are being ungenerous. That's my strong opinion. I will die on that hill. Um, but another one is just explaining too much. Like
Mm.
like a joke, like that you have to explain. It's not funny if you have to walk through each step.
Each
The
step,
funny
yeah.
part, yeah, the funny part is sitting back and letting the audience's brain fill in the blanks. And when they fill in those blanks successfully, they not only get to experience the same aha you did, but they're also very proud of themselves for having done so, which makes them laugh even harder. So just
Let
remove,
them discover it themselves, yeah.
remove.
Very much. Audience members here, thank you for being here. We have about 5 minutes more. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Um, so we do have one from Shalini actually. She says, Lisa, what do you think makes for a memorable story in today's real short attention span culture?
I think first of all, I think that I question the premise. I don't think we have short attention spans. I think we have long attention spans as we always have. But I think we spend
Why
too
do you
much
believe
time.
that? Sorry, why do you believe that?
Um, because if you look at like, you know, the kinds of stories that we're invested in, the kinds of, binge Netflixing and, long form TLDR was like a thing, but long form is coming back. People are reading longer articles. Like I just think this idea that we had short attention spans is like maybe something that the advertising world pressed upon us to convince us that we just needed short content. I don't know. I question the premise. Like I
Okay.
don't see any evidence for it. But if you want to get a strong point across in a short format, then I think again, it doesn't matter the format length. Like the most memorable moments are when someone feels as though they came to the conclusion, at least in some regard, on their own, right? So whether it's a tweet or it's a novel, just try to weave in there an opportunity to co-create, really, like leave those blanks available for the audience or the recipient of the message to build and braid with you. And when you do that, they'll never forget it because they'll feel authorship and co-ownership over it with you.
That's amazing. I hope that answered your question, Shalini. I do have one question which was sent to me by Divya Vishwanathan. If you recall, she worked with you at IDEO, and she's a big fan of your work, obviously. So she sent me two questions, one of which I think we've covered. The first one was how do you help leaders make transformative business shifts through compelling storytelling? I think in different parts we've sort of covered some of that. Was there anything you'd like to add specifically about that? I do have another question. Maybe let me read out the other question also, which is what are some learnings from EdTech? Because she said that you've obviously done a lot of work in that space and other systemic industries like healthcare that have really shaped your work and thinking.
Yeah. Well, since we kind of covered the first one a little bit, I'll address the second one. Yes, I have spent a lot of my career in these weird esoteric industries. I fell into them by accident as a young person in my 20s when I was an investment banker, healthcare and education. And these are funny little industries because they have so many players and they don't behave according to all the usual consumer mechanisms, meaning the person who pays for the thing is often not the same person who receives the service.
Mhm.
So in education, you might have a student who's receiving the education, but their parents are paying, or maybe a grant or a scholarship is paying. And in healthcare, you're receiving the healthcare, but there's an insurance company that's paying. And so when you have these third-party payer systems, all of the incentives and motives within the system are really different than just really basic, straightforward consumer business. And I've had to keep that in mind, I think, throughout my whole career, especially because I almost always work in that space. And so there's just far more complex systems when you can't count on the usual incentive structures. So I think storytelling comes up for me in those systems because you constantly have to think of the story from the angle of each player.
Hmm.
That thing that's like history is it's different depending on who wrote it. So you just have to think of each situation as like, well, how would the scholarship giving foundation write this story? How would the student who's undertaking the education write this story? How would the university with the faculty write the story? Like from each person's vantage point, how would they see this? What are their incentives? What are their motivations? What's a good outcome look like for them? And a lot of times they're conflicting. I mean, especially in healthcare, you can think like, there are conflicting incentive structures where the insurance company doesn't want you to get all the care that you may need. So just trying to view everything through the protagonist lens,
Hmm.
if one gets the opportunity to be the protagonist of their own version of the story, then what does a good outcome look like? And I think that helps find compromise solutions where there's some kind of Venn diagram where everybody can win.
Amazing. We're at time. I have a couple of quick questions. These are which is what gives you energy?
Um, I think rosé on the patio.
Rosé for the win.
Yeah.
What is one thing you can talk about every day for the next 1 year?
Ah, human behavior. Human behavior.
Amazing. And where can people find you and get in touch with you?
LinkedIn. Yeah. LinkedIn. You'll find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this, Lisa. I really appreciate your time here. It was really nice. There were so many layers to it, and I think we covered the same sort of perspective from different perspectives, or from a variety of different angles. Thank you for everyone who in this meeting. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your time. I do this once a week. This is LinkedIn for Leaders. Next week we're having a conversation with Shia. She was the head of global community at Draper Startup House. She's otherwise based in Singapore, and we're going to be talking about the startup ecosystem and building a narrative from that sort of lens. But thank you again, Lisa.